In this video, we're going to take a look at some code side by side, and we'll see what makes Svelte different and why Vue can't just copy it. We'll start off with a super simple example, just to show the most basic differences in philosophy. So here on the left, we've got our Vue version. So we're defining source and name as properties. And then here in the template, we've got the image tag. And the image tag, so here for the source, this colon means that whatever is in the quotes is going to be JavaScript. And so here, this src is not actually a string src, it is this variable, which happens to be a string, but is pulling from the variable. And here in the alt, inside the quotes, we're creating a template string, and then it's JavaScript, so we use the $ and the brackets to input the other variable. Svelte looks much simpler. So here in the image tag, we see that, all right, the source goes here, and the alt is this, which is the name, dancing. And these brackets, the open and close brackets, always tell Svelte that this is going to be JavaScript coming in. So if you look at these examples side by side, and I'll go ahead and make it in the same formatting so it's even more clear. So really the big difference is these two lines. So we can see that this line is a clear win over this one. It contains the exact same information in many fewer characters. There are no wasted characters here. And here, the difference in line length is smaller, but the noise that it reduces is, in my mind, even more important, because these backticks, like you have the quote then the backticks. One of my most common silly mistakes I make is forgetting to start or end one of these backticks because we have, two quotes right in a row, or forgetting to do this. So if I did this, then it'll just be this string. And these are silly mistakes, but it's really easy to make them because we have all this extra syntax. Whereas here, super easy. So one question you may be thinking, well, you're thinking one of two questions. One, either why does Vue do all of this extra stuff? Or you might be thinking, hey, this Svelte code is not real HTML. Let's look at another comparison. So in this example, we are hitting a checkbox and changing the size of some text. And we're doing that through applying the big class here. And here's the Vue code. And over here is the Svelte code. And if you look at them side by side, this is the big difference here. No pun intended. But the Vue version is twice as long to display basically the same information. And this is because Vue and Svelte have chosen for themselves different constraints around what their syntax can be. And Vue's is closer to what real HTML is. If we look at the control flow, we'll also see here that Vue is closer to real HTML, although not quite, while Svelte is cleaner and easier to read. So here we've got an if and an else statement here. So if we can log in and log out. This is purposely super simple. Then over here on the Svelte side, we, instead of using the vif directive in a tag and the velse directive in a tag, we use some special syntax that is not even close to HTML. And it's very consistent with the rest of Svelte syntax. We've got the open bracket and the close bracket here, and we've got the same thing, except now we have a hash before the if. And this is really useful because we can see that this is not a tag. This is something completely different. And we can see that at a glance with the code highlighting. Whereas over here, you have to dig in and actually read the code before you see that this is actually part of the control flow. And if someone does the ordering wrong, if they stick this v-else in between other stuff, then it can be really difficult to find. The v-for directive also suffers from a similar problem. So here we've got a listing of cats with links. And what we're doing here is we're using the v-for directive and the key attribute on an li tag. And then that loops through the cats and gives us the cat object and the index. And here over in Svelte, what we do is we have just a standalone each, which is not part of HTML and is clearly distinguishable. And the syntax is a little bit different, in my opinion, a little bit nicer in the Svelte example, because you can destructure this, and for the key, you don't have to have a completely separate line. It's just known that this is where the key goes. Because once again, in Vue, there are a lot of ways we can mess this up and make it harder to read and figure out where things are happening. And if you really mess this up, you put the v-for there, it can be hard to even tell that there is an each going on, that you're looping over stuff. Whereas in Svelte, it's front and center. Now we'll be moving on from stuff that's not real HTML to stuff that's not real JavaScript. And you'll see that the readability gains are even bigger here. So here on the left side, we have set up with our Vue reactivity system. So we've got count, which is a reference, and then we have doubled, which is a computed property where we get the value of the count reference and multiply it by 2. And then we have a watcher where every time the count changes, it runs this, and if the new value is greater than 10, it sends an alert and sets the value back to 9. And this is what it looks like when using it. And so this is a super simple example that's commonly used to demonstrate stuff. And we can see the huge difference in readability in Svelte. There's the most obvious part where in Vue you have to use .value on any reference. And you don't have to do that if it's in the template. And that's just confusing. And there is an RFC that should be making this a little bit better. But there are some things that Vue will not be able to match. And so even if you get rid of this .value, this is still noisier than this. And this is, yes, it's not real JavaScript, although it kind of is, because this is a label, which is a JavaScript feature. It's just being used in a way that isn't used anywhere outside of Svelte. And then you have the watch, where here we've got a lot of setup, and here it's just very simple. So we're basically removing this wrapper and replacing it with just this. And that removes basically all of the noise. So at this point, you may be thinking, how is Svelte so consistently better at being readable than the other frameworks? And why don't the other frameworks just change a little bit on a breaking version in order to catch up? And that's because there are some technological and ideological commitments the other frameworks have made. That means they can't just follow Svelte's lead. Let's take a look. So here in our Vue code, let's go ahead and put in a debugger statement and click, and our debugger is caught. And what you'll notice here is that what you see in the browser here is basically the same thing as what we've written over here. Like, yes, the template has been turned into other stuff, but the JavaScript is extremely similar, almost exactly the same thing. Now let's compare that to the outputted code in Svelte. So we'll go ahead and put a debugger here on the watch statement, and you'll see that we can match some of the code here, right, to here, and then we can match the count up here, but there's a lot of other code there, and unless you really know what you're looking for, especially on more complex components, it can be hard to figure out what goes where, what matches what. So this is the big difference that lets Svelte do a lot of the magic that makes it so nice to write in. But it's also why other frameworks will not be able to match it. It's because Svelte compiles the JavaScript. So in Svelte, you write your components, and then the compiler turns those components into vanilla JavaScript that is then sent to the browser. And that vanilla JavaScript does not include the Svelte framework. Meanwhile, in other frameworks, you have the components that you write, you send those to the browser along with the framework, and then on the browser, you run those files through the framework. And that both takes up more room and is slower, but with the benefit of what you see in the inspector looks closer to what you've written. Personally, I don't think having this and this match is that big of a benefit, because a lot of this complexity that you see here that's in this vanilla JavaScript, it was just pushed into the framework code in the Vue and React examples. And so you'd have to deal with that complexity anyways. It's just hidden away, whereas here it's right out there. In the end, I'd take this code over this code any day of the week. That doesn't necessarily mean I'll be porting all of my Vue over to Svelte right now. That's for a couple reasons. First, because although this is unequivocally better than this does stand out more in the smaller examples than in the larger ones. Yes, your larger components will look significantly better in Svelte, but it's not quite as stark when you have more business logic and less framework logic. And second, because although this is better, it's not a, oh my goodness, drop all new development and rewrite amount of better. There is very little that is that much better. However, if I am starting a new project, I will strongly consider Svelte.